Now, this morning we're delighted to say congratulations to one of our own and one of our regular and most entertaining, and dare I say cherished guests on Morning Focus. The Ennis native Fergal O'Keefe has been named the Local Broadcaster of the Year at the Travel Extra Travel Journalist of the Year Awards in Dublin. It's the second year in a row Fergal has picked up the prestigious prize, recognised for the consistently high standard of his travel segments right here Morning Focus. He's also the voice, as you well know, because you listen to it, behind the hugely popular podcast Travel Tales with Fergal, which is now listened to in over 140 countries worldwide. That's nearly as many countries as you've visited, Fergal.
Thank you so much. I have to say, it was on over the weekend, and I was so chuffed. It's a lovely event. I won the same award last year, so it was, I suppose, doubly special to, no pun intended, to win it 2 years in a row. Like being surrounded every year. It's a lovely event because you're surrounded by your sort of peers in the travel industry. It's a big event, and the judging panel is sort of a group of travel editors. So, it was a very, very special night, I have to say.
And for listeners who mightn't be familiar with the Travel Extra Awards, as you say, it's prestigious. It sounds like it's quite significant within travel journalism, the kind of thing you and others like you aspire to be recognised in.
Yeah, very much. And, we're in very good company. So I won Local Broadcaster of the Year, and the National Broadcaster of the Year was actually RTE for their nationwide show. And so, we're in very good company. Excuse me. But, when you get, as you know yourself, like anything like that, when you get voted by your peers, it means an awful lot. And, it kind of had me thinking about it, because I suppose I started doing this when COVID originally happened. I started doing my Travel Tales with Fergal podcast, and then I started doing the travel slot with G. And then from that, actually, person I have to mention is Sarah from the Spanish Tourist Board, because then she invited me on a trip. I talked about it on your show, the Camino, and it kind of opened up a whole world for me, to be able to go travelling and talk about it. And it was something that I always did anyway. I was probably unusual that when I was, going on trips away and family holidays or holidays, I'd always be taking notes of, good hotels or, good places or towns or good things to do. So really, I always kind of did this, and then I'd make recommendations to friends, and friends would come to me with recommendations. So all I do now is just do it on a larger scale, doing it on Clare FM with your listeners. And just to give you an example, I haven't mentioned it before, but I do get messages. You always say to people, my at Travel Tales with Fergal Instagram.
Yeah.
I often get messages from people who listen to you on your radio show asking for advice about places to go. And I saw one there a while ago. I always kind of like to make recommendations, particularly places off the beaten track. And one of your listeners, it was probably one of my favourite places I ever went to, a place called Porto Caufo in the Halkidiki in Greece. And even at the weekend, I was talking to, the person in charge of the tourist board for Greece in London. And I was, telling her about this place, and she had never been there. But one of your listeners went on a family holiday to that very same place and sent me a message afterwards on Instagram to thank me for the recommendation. And I suppose the reason why I do it is I get such a buzz out of that when I make a recommendation and then somebody goes there and they love it. And, I always say to people, I'm only recommending things that personally I love. So, I go, I don't know if it's going to be for you. And, I want to thank you, particularly Alan, and your team, because, one, you always get the best out of me, whenever often I come off and I go, how do I end up going off on that tangent, when I'm talking to you.
I love tangents, Fergal, what can I say?
I know. I always go off going, how did I end up talking about like Tahiti when I was talking about Christmas or something like that? But, the other thing is you do let me, we talk about popular places like the Canaries, but you do let me to go off and like that place in Halkidiki, you always let me go off, to talk about places off the beaten track. And I think that's the thing that people are really interested in. And, even at the awards, talking to other journalists, something that kind of came up was, compared to in the past, I mean, back in I suppose, the early noughties and in the 90s, all the main newspapers would have had travel, separate travel sections every week. And then it went into the main section, and then it became, a couple of articles, maybe down to one article. So, it's kind of unusual in one way. And I suppose the same for everything with media that, at a time when more people than ever are now going on holidays and traveling abroad, or are interested in travel, that there are less and less, newspapers and radio stations that actually cover travel. So fair play to you for actually covering travel, because I do think it is something that your listeners are interested in, and also especially for letting me go off on those tangents that I always go off on.
Well, I kind of view those tangents as the kind of, I can imagine you in these places and you enjoy going off the beaten track. That's the vocal the vocal version of it. But I think as well, Fergal, it's lovely that listeners get in touch with you, particularly to, give you the thumbs up for recommending somewhere they should go, and they go and they love it. Because I guess in the modern world we live in, it's with all the technology and internet, sound like an old man, sound like Victor Meldrew now, talking about the internet, that the world has become a smaller place. So maybe people are more and more looking to go to the less obvious, more off the beaten places to discover something new. And you bring a lot of new destinations to us, and you go into great detail on them, which is brilliant, because I think that's what listeners enjoy in particular, is that you really paint the picture. We almost feel as if we're there with you. Sadly, we're not, because you're the only one of us who has the suntan to prove you were, but you really do bring it to life.
I know, and something that in the last week I was talking about something else, but it was about trust, i.e., people are using AI now to get information, but sometimes it can be completely wrong or inaccurate. And I suppose that's a big factor. Is we all love that, particularly Irish people. It's trust and getting personal recommendations and personal stories, which I think will become more and more important in that world of AI and getting, the internet, where it gets its story sometimes and it can be completely wrong. And, the funny thing is, just say my podcast, I have another one just out today talking about Seville. And actually, it's with a guy called Ed Byrne, who won National Broadcaster of the Year. But at the very start of it, I just said to him, and it just kind of reminds me with you as well, as I said to him at the very start of it, I go, geez, I'm reading over my notes and I'm really excited to be chatting about Seville and the region. And it's always the same with you. I think I've said that to you before, that when I'm doing notes, I'd send you notes, beforehand, just to give you an idea about where we're going to talk about. And I get so excited. Sometimes I've, like, whatever I sent you, I might have quadruples of that, because I just go down a rabbit hole. But I suppose the point is that I love it so much. And I was saying that to someone actually at the awards, that these trips that I go on and doing this, we were both kind of telling each other how lucky we were doing this. And I was just saying that it kind of means, when I'm doing it on these trips, it means double to me, because I love it so much. Do you know what I mean? It just gives me, when I go on these trips, and then when I get the chance to talk to you about it afterwards, it gives me energy, because it means so much to me. And also, I suppose the way things are when you're looking at the news, particularly over the last week or so, if I look at Twitter, it's sort of, talking about going down a rabbit hole, but you could go down a rabbit hole of negative news. So being able to talk about something, about travel and about meeting people, is a lovely thing. And again, something I was saying to someone the other day, if you meet somebody that travels a lot, they're not going to be narrow-minded. They're going to be open. They're generally interesting, good people.
Because broadens your horizons, doesn't it?
Yes. And your opinions, the more, I was thinking about this the other day, just say, for instance, a country like America, I guarantee you, the people that are narrow-minded and have a closed view probably have never left the country. They've probably never travelled, because travel opens your mind to the level of you meet. For instance, my last time I was on talking to you, I was talking about Switzerland and Austria, and both countries, about skiing there. It probably took me about a day in each country to kind of tune into how particularly the Swiss, they're so, perfect when it comes to time, to rules, etc. But by the end of the trip, I really enjoyed that, and I tuned into it, and I kind of got an understanding of the benefits of being like that. And I love that, or like when I go to France, or just say you go to somewhere like Spain or Italy, I actually love the chaos of those countries just as much, because it's so different, but I love those things equally.
Well, you see, Fergal, you're proof that travelling broadens the mind and the horizons, as you've just been saying, because you've been to Switzerland, so you know that you would never go there and say, if it hadn't been for America, you'd all be speaking German and a little Japanese, because you know full well you're already in a German-speaking country.
Exactly, summed up perfectly. You're totally right. And another thing, like, just that I'd like to mention is, just say, at the awards, like, I was actually sitting at a table with a guy called Keane Byrne. And then so Keane was sitting and I was on one side of him, and a girl called Deirdre Mullins was on the other side. And Deirdre went up and she won the award for digital media, and she's been on my podcast many times. And I won my award, and then I was feeling sorry for Keane, going, oh gosh. And then he won the overall award, and he flew in that day from Morzine. So when I was coming down, I wasn't actually thinking about myself. I was more going, gosh, I feel bad for Keane. But then he won the overall award. But I had him on because he wrote a guide for Ireland, and I had him on the podcast a few times, but just about that guide just before Christmas. As I said, I have a new podcast, Travel Tales with Fergal, out today with Ed Finn, that won the national award last year. I've had Paul from the Irish Independent on the podcast. Catherine, my next podcast, which will be about my trip to Switzerland, Catherine Murphy won the skiing award. So, I've kind of met these people over the years, and I like to think I've a good eye for talent like you, because, I think it's important, your listeners. I mean, I can't talk to myself. I don't come onto the radio. You get the best out of me, and I think that's you really do. Like, and I love your styles and I love the show. So I want to thank you.
Producer Evelina, I think I'm going to have to walk out of the studio here sideways later on. My head is far too big to squeeze out that door now. No, we appreciate it, Fergal. And it's lovely to see, as you talk about, this all really germinated during COVID, and it's turned into not just a cottage industry, but one that you love being involved in. And I guess that's part of another reason why it's great to have you on, and where you've been and what you're talking about appeals to listeners, because it's the passion that comes out, and you're doing what you love to do, albeit you're very, very busy between the podcast and you actually have to travel to these places. It is dirty work, but I guess somebody has to do it. But then, you were talking about the notes earlier on, and there's so much you want to tell us, and I can tell the listeners, if I can pull the curtain back here a little bit, Fergal does provide extensive notes, but anytime I get them, it's so much in it, and I often think, God, when I think about how much Fergal has had to filter out here, because you go to wonderful places and there's so much to inform the listeners about, but there's only so much you can tell them. So you really do have to be, I'd say you have to make some tough choices in what you do bring to us and what you're just not able to bring to us.
Well, actually, I don't make the choices. I let you make the choices, and so I kind of enjoy that, because you just asked the question. So I let you make the choices, and I suppose that's what's also great about being able to complement this with my Travel Tales with Fergal podcast, because I can go into much more detail there. Like, just say, for instance, Ed, I did 3 episodes like that. I did one trip going to the area around between Seville and Cordoba, and I've done 3 episodes now. I'd recommend people to listen to one today about Seville and the area around Seville. And in my last season, I did 2 episodes in talking about Cordoba, and one of the episodes was with a woman who owns this, it was an old Moorish palace. She's sort of part of the Spanish royalty, like her her husband is, and so her story was the story of Andalusia. So meeting someone like that, and then being able to talk to her about her story and share that, for me is just unbelievable, like an amazing experience. And then to recommend, because that's something that I've told people to go to that place, but it's completely off the beaten track. And even places, we talk a bit about Seville and we talk about Cordoba and same on your show, but then I really talked about the areas in between, because that's what I really recommend to people, is to try and get to the places that are off the beaten track, because that's where you really get to experience the magic, But as well as, we always talk about the popular places as well, I mean, my most listened to podcast episode last year was the Canaries one, so it's still very, very popular. But it is great to be able to talk about those places that are a little bit off the beaten track compared to, because everything, you can look up the regular spots, but it really is special, And I must mention another guy, actually, Sean, I've mentioned him before, but Sean O'Neill, who's, from Clare, he works for TII, and he'll be on your show talking about the roads as well. He's a communications guy. But it was actually before COVID, he had said to me that I should do a podcast. And I was like, hardly, you must be joking. And then it was during COVID when everything shut down and nothing was happening. That's when I started to do the podcast. And then Clare FM happened after that. But as I always say to people, there were some positives that came out of COVID. And I suppose for me personally, that was that. Even I was talking to my son the other day, I was doing a thing. This is a slight tangent, but I was at a thing the other night.
A tangent from Fergal O'Keefe? Well, I never.
But I was at this thing the other night and they had questions at the table, and it was like, what year would you go back to if you could go back to 1 year? So the first thing that came into my head was 1995, when Clare won the All-Ireland. And my wife, Emer, goes, that was the year I was abroad. She wasn't even in the country at the time. But my son...
You charmer.
I said to my son the other day, and he said 2020, which I thought was amazing. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah,
it was like
of all years.
Of COVID. Yeah, but do you know what I mean? Because the world slowed down, etc. So, there was some things that came out of that were positive.
Certainly for you. And before I let you go, Fergal, I'm sure there'll be people listening who, and particularly younger people who are passionate about travel and are listening to your story, and this is something they'd like to pursue as a career, and they dream of working in broadcasting or travel journalism. What advice would you give them? Or perhaps maybe you don't want to give them any advice because you have your eyes on a third Local Broadcaster of the Year award and you want to do a three-peat and you don't want any competition. That's fair enough too.
I always encourage people, and actually one of the awards at the Travel Journalist of the Year Awards, because they do want to encourage people to get into it, Aer Lingus sponsors, and it's a Young Travel Writer of the Year for sort of secondary school students. So I would really recommend anyone younger to enter that. I think it's only maybe 100 or 200 words that they have to write, but I would really recommend anyone to do that. And I suppose the big advice I'd say to anyone is to just to do it, because I think that's half the crack, isn't it? The people, even me, just say before I had needed something like COVID for me to eventually go to give it a go, just say, flip it, I might as well try this now. Whereas I mightn't have had the courage to do that. As I said, when I was growing up, I always loved travel and writing stuff about travel, but never actually sharing it with anybody. So I suppose that's the big thing, to believe in yourself and to actually just not care what people think. Just write for yourself and put that out, or podcast for yourself or whatever, and just put it out.
Well, you see, I did say that there'd be a few people out there who'd love to do what you're doing. We've had a WhatsApp message saying, how did Fergal get his job? Well, he told us earlier on. So follow the Fergal O'Keefe story, and who knows, it could happen for you. And as ever, I will say, if you are ever looking for any travel advice or anything in that line of words of wisdom, no better man to get in touch with. And you can either get in touch with Fergal through his socials, be it Instagram, X and so on, or send your questions into us here at 086 1800 964. We'll put them to Fergal the next time he's on. Fergal, well done again, fully deserved. Glad that we here at Morning Focus played a part in it. Hopefully you can do the three-peat next year, and looking forward to you coming on again and finding out what awful place you've had to endure for our listening pleasure. So for the moment, thank you very much.
Thanks very much, I really appreciate it, and thank you again.
The great Fergal O'Keefe there. Make sure you check out the Travel Tales with Fergal podcast. There's people in over 140 countries listening to it, so it's got to be good.